Boeing and the 747. Why am I doing this one? We're not talking about drugs. We're not talking about homelessness. We're not talking about people whacking each other with swords. Boeing 747 jet. Boeing is an enormous influence here in the Pacific Northwest. Thomas Brothers map. We used to use them before we had our phone and GPSs. In order to get around, in order to find people's homes, you had to have a Thomas Brothers map. So I spent, 25 years on a Thomas Brothers map. I would always have a handful of them in my car. The ones with the ripped out pages were, at the bottom of the stack. The ones with the least ripped out pages, map pages 560 and 523 were the ones where I was always appraising the most, whatever it was. But on the Thomas Brothers map page in Everett, there is a big building, and it was so big that they called it the world's largest building because it was. And that's where they built the 747. And the last 747 is going out there today. And I know we've got a bunch of Boeing engineers that watch this show religiously. So that's why I wanted to do this one. Also, when I was a kid, the 747 jumbo jet had just been rolled out. It got rolled out in 1969. So I remember being very little, making a trip over to Australia. My dad sold some development or something, because it was really expensive to send the whole family on a round trip trip to Australia. Back then, it was just expensive. Air travel wasn't, what it is today. You didn't have all these nonstop flights. So we'd fly into, Honolulu, and then we'd fly into Fiji, where I drank the water when I was a baby and I got wildly sick, and it wasn't good. Don't drink the water. If you don't know what you're doing, don't drink the water. I was little, so I didn't have that option. But on one of our trips, my brother and I, we got brought into the cockpit of the jumbo 747 jet. This is when it'd been out there a handful of years, but it was still kind of a novel deal. And we fly in Qantas, and they'd give you those airline pilot things that you'd wear. They give you a bunch of stuff. They give you a bunch of candy, a bag with candy, hard candy, because they knew that screaming children on ascent and descent on a 17-hour plane flight, it's not good for the morale of, the people on the plane. So they'd load you up with candy, and you just did that trick. You got a grab bag of stuff if you were a kid and you were flying international like that back in the day, especially to Australia. I don't know. That's the only place I really flew that I remember. But we get on the 747 jet and we get into the cockpit. It's just massive. And we do that drill. And then the pilot says, "Hey, I'm going to have you take a little tour with the flight steward." I don't even know what you call him now. As long as I don't, dead name somebody or misgender somebody, I figure I'm good. Flight attendant. Do we go with that? And she took us upstairs to the cocktail lounge upstairs. And I thought that was so cool. I'm like, we're on a double-decker plane. They've got a bar up here. I think it was kind of like a restaurant bar. You could go up there if you were an adult, but we were kids, so we weren't doing that kind of thing. But, to get on a jumbo jet that, flew you that far was just, at the time I was little and thought this is normal, but my parents explained to me that this is pretty new technology. We didn't used to be able to do this. My mom came on a steamship over here from Australia in, I think, 68. It took weeks and weeks and weeks. Now we just fly, boom. But before the 747, it changed everything. It was a game changer. So that's why we're talking about it now on this ridiculous podcast. Boeing delivers their final 747 jumbo jet to Atlas Air, and that's happening today, right now. Atlas Air ordered 4 747-8 Freightliners early last year, and the final jet leaves the factory Tuesday, today. So, this is pretty cool. This is history in the making. We don't have as much demand for this kind of plane, but the 737, you bet. And, a lot's changed. Back when they were making these planes, we didn't have Microsoft. We didn't have Amazon. We didn't have all this other crazy stuff coming out of Seattle. That came in the 80s, right? Came in the 80s and got going in the 90s, and it's here to stay because we're probably, stuck with computers. Boeing is delivering its final 747 jumbo jet on Tuesday after a ceremony at the company's factory in Washington State. The jet is served as a cargo plane, a commercial aircraft capable of carrying nearly 500 passengers. If you think about that, that's a lot of people just up in the air, right? That's a lot of folks. I remember walking on those jets thinking, this is so big. And when you're little and you can't see over the seats and you walk into the back of the plane and you're just hoping, God, I hope we are nowhere near the smoking section. Invariably, you would be one effing seat in front, one row in front of the smoking section. And then you just, smoke it up and you'd get off the plane and until you got to wherever you're going, my grandma's house in Australia in Sydney, you'd smell like a secondhand cigarette, right? I mean, she's like, who smoked? We flew. Oh, yeah. Remember when that was a thing? Smoking in a plane? Crazy stuff. Some of you younger kids can't imagine that. It was pretty harsh. Guys would just chain smoke. And then when that first went into effect, when was that? The 90s? I think that went into effect in the 90s. People were still smoking it up in the bathrooms and had all that kind of stuff. It took time, people a long time. See, a cargo plane, commercial aircraft capable of carrying 500 people, transport for NASA's space shuttles, and the Air Force One presidential aircraft since it first took flight in 1969. It revolutionized travel by connecting international cities that never had direct routes, while also helping to democratize passenger flight. Before that, flight was basically for the rich. All of a sudden, you can get a whole bunch of people on a plane, and that started to take off. People started flying more and made, travel just that much more available. And for my family, with half of my family in Australia, that was a big deal for us growing up. Is we'd be able to fly, go see my family, go see my cousins, go see my grandma, go see my uncles. Half my family still down under, good friends down under, just where they are. In the past 15 years, however, Boeing and its European rival Airbus have introduced more profitable and fuel-efficient wide-body planes that have just 2 engines compared to the 747's 4. The final plane is the 1,574th, built by Boeing in the Puget Sound region of Washington State. 1,574. That's a lot of planes. One of the things that I've been looking at lately is you got all these jack-off politicians and Hollywood stars and NBA players, and they're all so concerned about the environment. And then you've got all this exposure on, them walking up the ramp to their private jet, which just pumps however many tons of carbon into the environment. So they're like, nah, you need to recycle your plastics, but I'm going to ride my private jet, that kind of thing. Are we really going to get away from that? Are we going to really get away from all this pollution? Yeah, we're probably going to make it a little bit better. But all this virtue signaling, that's just annoying, isn't it? It's like, you're talking this nonsense. And we know because we see pictures of you getting on your private jet. And they're talking about, the WNBA due to security reasons. The ladies of the WNBA needing to fly, private because of security. And you're like, okay, all right. Do they have that in their budget? No, because the NBA is basically sponsoring that league, right? They're subsidizing that league. They don't have the income to do that. But due to security, all right, whatever. A crowd of current and former Boeing workers is expected to be in attendance for the final send-off, and the last jet is being delivered to cargo air carrier Atlas Air. Big deal. It's kind of an end of an era because, you're going to build different planes, but there are so many people here in Washington State where Boeing used to be. Massive, biggest building in the world. Said so on my Thomas Brothers map. Thomas Brothers map wouldn't lie to me. They wouldn't. They just wouldn't. Yeah, and it's enormous. And when you drive by that building, you're like, that is a big building. I don't know how big that building is, but that's a big building. What I know is that my tape measure would not wrap around that building. It's just enormous. It's an enormous structure because, they're building 747s in it and they open up the doors and back them out or pull them out, whatever they do. If you love this business, you've been dreading this moment. Aviation analyst Richard Absolute whatever said, nobody wants a 4-engine airliner anymore. But that doesn't erase the tremendous contribution the aircraft made to the development of the industry or its remarkable legacy. And you will literally have conversations here with older folks, people like my age. I'm joking. Maybe 10 years older. A lot of engineers, a lot of People, I've got friends that have spouses that are riveters that are literally putting the planes together. So you got a lot of that still going on here. And this is kind of an end of the era. It's a sad end of the era, but technology upwards and onwards, I think we say. Boeing decided to build the 747 after losing a contract for a huge military transport, the C-5A. It was designed to take advantage of the new engines developed for the transport and use them for civilian aircraft. These high bypass turbofan engines burned less fuel by passing air around the engine core, which enabled a longer flight range. So just more, and here's another last thing I'm going to read on this. More than 50,000 Boeing workers built the first 747 in less than 16 months, earning them the nickname the Incredibles. That's pretty cool. The jet's production required the construction of a massive factory in Everett, which is located north of Seattle. That's the building I'm talking about. That's the building on my Thomas Brothers map. 50,000 people built the first 747 in less than 16 months. I mean, that's insane, right? That's insane, especially back then when we weren't doing quite as much of this. It wasn't just, another aircraft, massive aircraft. We had just flown, whether we believe it or not, we had just visited the moon, right? Because that was right after 69, right after I was born. I was born November of 68. So I can still claim to be a child of the 60s, but I'm literally a baby of the 60s. I was a year and change when 1970 rolled around.